Pioneer Dominique Reynolds. After Dokchara had fully healed, we picked a direction and started moving. Nothing good could come from staying around the crash site. There weren't even any weapons or tools we could realistically salvage, as the ship had been spread across a massive amount of land. Despite Dokchara knowing about the existence of the farm on this planet, the exact whereabouts were unknown and we didn't have any sort of map to work with. The planet wasn't uninhabited by any means. There were at least a couple billion Gratonian residents spread between the cities, but in the grand scheme of things and on a planet similar in size to Earth, there was a good chance that we could walk around the entire planet and not come into contact with civilization. If scouts were sent out to look for us, we might be able to hijack a vehicle, but that would come with the caveat of having every movement tracked. In reality, we weren't even sure what a search party would look like. For all we knew, we could already be under the eye of a satellite. Despite all the what-ifs we could think up, it had been unsettlingly quiet. That's not to say that there weren't the expected animal noises of a jungle, but there had been no clues of us being followed or efforts being made to locate us. Considering not even the Gratonian investigation force knew of what was hidden on this planet, we might not even be seen as a massive priority until someone who was actually clued in on the schemes at play was made aware of us being on this planet. This train of thought was interrupted by a disturbance in the back of my head, a small, buzzing feeling. I'd been scanning the surroundings every few steps, making sure we didn't miss anything like railroads or cable lines, but the scan I'd just made returned with a dead spot at the very edge behind me, one that wasn't there before, and I would have noticed passing by it, meaning that it was either a strange malfunction or something that didn't want to be seen had just closed in from behind. I turned just in time to see a flash of light preceding a projectile that shattered trees into showers of splinters and superheated the air around its path, forming a line of explosions between our distant admirer and myself. I didn't have the time to brace myself. There were no cues to react to before I could actually make visual contact with the attack, since this munition was traveling at a significant fraction of the speed of light. The bullet, which was actually just a tungsten cone about the size and length of my arm, embedded itself in my chest and imparted all of its momentum onto me, sending me flying and tumbling for the second time in the last few days. I hadn't been able to get a visual on the enemy, but they had signal shielding and some pretty impressive firepower, and now I was separated from Dokchara, who was unarmed and likely lacking understanding of what just happened in the blink of an eye. After almost 20 seconds of tumbling, I was able to get control over my momentum. I got up, pulled out the bullet, and started running back with all the force my augments could muster, almost reaching a land speed record as I flew through trees and rocks like they were mere suggestions. While I still wouldn't be able to detect that weapon before it fired, I at least knew what to expect and had a direction to work with. I could probably at least deflect the shot with my hands, since they were much sturdier than most of my body. Of course, that would only be necessary if Dokchara wasn't locked in a wrestling match with the Grat, who was bearing that signal jamming I had noticed earlier. The gun that had given me a short vacation, which looked like one of those rail guns out of a video game except about the size of the Grat's body, was bent along the barrel and laying on the ground. It seemed like the Great had tried to stab Dokchara, but instead got his knife snapped in half on Doc's carapace. I don't know how Dokchara managed to get the drop on him, but I wasn't going to complain about my friend being uninjured, and wow, he just took a bite out of the Grat. Dude, how hungry were you? I slowed myself down to the point where I would break a few bones at most and clotheslined the Gratonian, bringing him along with me until I slammed him into a tree and finally got a good look at this guy. He was a bit taller than most Gratonians I'd seen and wearing a jungle camo padded bodysuit. His jamming wasn't effective at point blank, and I was able to get a scan of him. It seemed like he had a watered-down version of the serum, as his density and the regeneration of the bones I broke were a bit underwhelming. I was surprised to see that he actually had implants in his head. I thought that the regenerative abilities would make that basically impossible to do. They were quite extensive, too. One of his eyes had been completely replaced with a high-power camera that directly interacted with his brain, giving him aim assistance via muscle control instead of relying on external systems. I also found out what the buzzing in my head was. He was sending a live feed of everything he saw to a satellite, and I'd managed to notice that thanks to the complete lack of other signals in the deep jungle. This was all neat and stuff, but I was still left with a problem. The Gratonian hadn't even bothered pleading for its life. The only sounds he ever made were grunts of pain. This one had been trained to not squeak, so I was left with a dead end, unless I had a way to read his mind. Could it be possible? His implants had radio transmission, and the security seemed like an afterthought, so I technically would be able to get into his head, but is that really safe for me? Would I even understand what I saw? Or would the shape of one's mind be too different for me to comprehend the forms of thoughts and memories? I had brief training on remotely accessing computers and taking data using my mind as a computer, so how different would it be to access an organic hard drive instead of a conventional one? I may as well try. And when I injected into the transmission, what I saw was a mess of references, networks of interconnected, unorganized pipes compared to the clean, uniformly shaped and parsable form of a man-made storage disk. The ones and zeros of binary were replaced with the yes and no of individual neurons, communicating intention to each other to form larger pieces of thought. Maybe there was a pattern, some form of organization, but it was foreign to me. Though looking at myself, there were uncanny similarities in the connections that formed. This fragment of his mind would make sense if it were just a bit different. Maybe if I cut these connections and strengthened a few on this side, bridging the missing links that made the encoding of this memory familiar to me. I could see a picture, a snapshot of the past that didn't belong to me. It was his memory, and I'd changed it to match what I understood. The memory itself wasn't anything interesting, just a blip of time from his training, but there were thousands of these for me to go through. Each time I did it, it got easier to do. This wasn't something that I could have automated. It was too delicate and required too much understanding of myself to rely on a machine for, but I was getting more proficient with each cut and paste that I made. More memories of training, a few about his family that didn't care much for him, signing up for the military, excelling amongst peers, getting recognized, getting chosen, all discarded. I didn't have use for another man's life. Now the more recent ones. Being deployed to this planet's space station like a bunch of others that were in the same program as him, not knowing why those specific planets needed highly accomplished agents guarding them. Seeing Mokangos being transferred from ships with no identifying features to the station and then down to the planet. Being alerted to our intrusion, heading down to the crash site and following our tracks using a sparse network of vibration sensors underground. I backed out to find the Gratonian foaming at the mouth, unresponsive to any attempts at getting a reaction out of him. He still had positive life signals, but it seemed that he was otherwise completely comatose. I also noticed Dokchara standing behind me, staring at me. How long had I been in there? What did you do to him? I, browsed his memories? Anyway, I got our next plan of attack. There's a space station that's used to channel Mokango prisoners. If we can get up there, we should be able to find out where they're being taken. Maybe we can even contact the Mayflower and get some help. What's going to happen to the Grat? Well, he tried to kill us, right? Quelch. Dokchara.
Dominique had started heading in a different direction after that fiasco, claiming that there was a military base about a day's worth of walking from us. I was still a bit confused about what he had done to that Gratonian, but I didn't really have any other good options, and his explanations flew over my head. Something about accessing neural networks through implants to read memories. It sounded like a fictional story to me, no matter how he spelled it out. He'd picked up the massive gun that the Grat used to send him off, and was trying to get it working again. I honestly didn't want to be anywhere near him when he attempted to test it, since his genius method of repairing the damage it had taken was simply bending it back into shape until it was good enough. I know that he could probably see even the slightest imperfection in the gun with his freakish eyes, but that didn't give me much peace of mind when he kept going off about how different the alien technology was. If I'd known he would make such a fuss about that thing, I wouldn't have slammed it on a rock when I got the drop on that Gratonian. By the way, how did you even manage to get close to that guy, let alone wrestle him down? If he shot me from the edge of my scanner with that much precision, I'd assume he had visuals on both of us. It's exactly that, Dom. When he fired at you, the shockwave was enough to launch me back a ways away. That force would be enough to kill most known species, so I took that opportunity to temporarily stop my heart and try to mess with his info. It worked exactly as planned since he came up to me with his guard down, probably to confirm the kill or something. After that, it was just a matter of difference in weight class. You could even fool me with that, you know? It's a bit freaky. Excuse me? Freaky. Man, you're the one with a gaping hole in his chest. Don't make fun of it. Chicks dig scars, you know? I gave him my best look of annoyance. I don't know if he understood the facial expression, but he at least got the sentiment. It really pisses me off because I know he can regenerate that in minutes. He's just keeping it to mess with me. Other than the sparse interactions we had, trekking through the dense jungle resulted in long periods of walking in silence. I took these mental downtimes as opportunities to think back on what's happened in such a short amount of time, and just how far I planned on taking this. We were on a border planet with just one farm on it. Taking it out and freeing the captives would be just a scratch in this massive operation. It was an ambition of mine to play hero and be the savior of my kind. But I've just come to realize how much I've relied on Dominique for pretty much everything so far. It'd be unfair for me to ask him, "Hey, want to destroy one of the biggest empires in the galaxy with me? I have no way to repay you, but it'd sure be a good deed." Aside from these intrusive feelings of inadequacy, there's been another, more sinister topic plaguing my mind. I'm afraid of Dominique. Not in a way that would cause me to be skittish around him or anything like that. It's more like a twisted awe of his methods. When he pinned that Gratonian to a tree and browsed his memories, the eyes of that grot woke up a suppressed memory of mine. It was from my early youth, when my people were still at war with the Gratonians. My home planet was originally somewhat close to our border with them, but as the war went on, we fell more under the direct line of fire. I remember hiding in a bunker, being held by my uncle as the power was shut down and lights were temporarily down. There was this high-pitched noise, and the feeling of someone scraping the back of my skull with a knife. I wanted to fall on the ground, ball up and cover my ears, physically react in any way, but my uncle was holding on to me too tightly and not letting go. I had assumed that he couldn't hear my pleas over the noise, that he was suffering just like I was. When the emergency lights were turned back on, I failed to understand what I was looking at until it was spelled out for me later on. My uncle, the only person I had left after my parents went to the war and were announced MIA, had lost his mind. Not in the sense of going crazy, but in the sense that there were no instructions of life left in his brain. His body was still functional, his organs still working, and muscles still keeping me in place. But the man himself was gone. They had to pry me out of the husk that refused to let me go. About half of the people in that shelter left for better horizons that night, their bodies still executing the last command they ever received. And the Gratonian that Dominique had killed shared the same eyes as those people. Glossed over, unfocused, his body still gasping for air in Dom's chokehold, while his mind was long gone. I know that Dominique is not like the Gratonians, that he has compassion and humor, and that he values his humanity, as dumb as that sounds. I know that he has harbored nothing but good intentions when trying to help me out of situations and keeping out for my well-being. I know that what he did was only possible because of a direct connection to that Grat's mind, and that he would never use a mind-destroying sonic weapon, as that would fall under too many of his war crimes. Despite all this, I can't help but feel terrified at what I saw back there. "Hey, Doc! Ah! Great ruler above, don't fucking startle me like that. My bad? How else am I supposed to get your attention? I was going to ask if you're okay. You look like you just saw a ghost." "A what? Tusk, I'm fine. Are we there yet?"